Today I'm going to go over the second chapter. The title of the chapter is Money and the Payment Systems. What I'm not going to do in this brief presentation is to go over the definitions. Well, you can get to see the definitions. I suggest you read this chapter from the ebook or from your textbook. But what I'm going to do in this chapter is to present some important questions and go over and discuss the answers of these questions. As a matter of fact, I prepared 13 questions. So the first question, consider the following. There are two countries, X and Y. Each country has the same resources and produces the same goods. The residents of country X use money while the residents of country Y rely on bartering of goods. Will each country produce the same quantity of output? Explain. Short answer is no. And let me explain it. The residents of the country Y will definitely spend more time by transacting and trying to create a double coincidence of once and may have to rely on multiple trades to do so. They will also likely specialize less, which will reduce the gains to the country from specialization. However, in the country X, the residents will be able to transact immediately using money in an efficient way, and will be also able to specialize in what they do well, creating a more efficient economy. Question number 2. What does it mean to say that an asset is liquid? An asset is liquid when it can be converted into a means of payment very quickly and without much cost. Let me give you an example. Before the financial crisis, the housing credit, or so-called mortgage-backed securities, the securities that are backed by housing credits, are considered as liquid assets. That's why they were prevalent in the system, in the financial system. But it turns out that they are not as good as they were perceived once upon a time. So their liquidity dropped, and the credit dried up. Many college campuses use the student ID cards as a way for students to pay for on-campus expenses such as books, copies, and food. For convenience, some students will maintain a balance on their ID cards. Are these balances a means of payment? Are they a store of value? Explain why or why not. Well, the student ID cards are no different than a checking account. Is checking account a means of payment? Yes. Is it a store of value? Yes, again. Therefore, the balances on the card serve as both a means of payment and a store of value. Using the student ID card in this way is an example of stored value card, similar to a gift card for a store or a card used to pay for the public transportation. While these stored value cards are not included in the money supply, they are used as a means of payment and a store of value. Question number 4. Explain how money solves the problem of the double coincidence of wants. Well, consider an economy that doesn't rely on the use of money. Then, if the people in this country are going to specialize at all, they have to depend on the barter, which is the exchange of one good or service for another. In the situation of barter, it may be more likely that the individual who has what the other person wants will not want what the other person has. In this case, the multiple trades may be necessary to ultimately obtain what is desired for both counterparties. So with the use of money, everyone accepts it because it's a legal tender or because it's backed by the government. Then one exchange will be enough. In reality, you can say that money creates an immediate double coincidence of wants because the transaction is very quick and transaction is costless. Question number 5. Is a store of value distinguishes money from the other assets? Well, it's not, because there are many assets that fall into category of financial assets that are good stores of value, like common stocks, government bonds, treasury bills. What distinguishes money is that it is liquid, meaning the transaction is quick and transaction is costless, as I mentioned in the last question. Well, uh, the other assets can be converted into a spendable form. However, it can be costly to turn a bond, a treasury bill, or a stock into a means of payment, especially if it has to be done on a short notice. Question number 6. What distinguishes commodity money from fiat money? Commodity money, just like the immediate examples would be gold or silver, has value even if it's not used as money. So gold or silver has an intrinsic value. For example, if you're not using gold as a means of payment, you can always melt it down and convert it into a jewelry. However, in fiat money, such as US paper currency, it really has no intrinsic value. Then it's used as money. So its value derives from the fact that it's deemed to be a legal tender by the US government, and 2, people are willing to accept it. Question number 7. Explain why credit cards are not considered money even though people seem to use them like money. It's not money because it's not an asset. As a matter of fact, the use of a credit card actually creates a liability or an obligation for the user. A credit card is a promise by a bank to lend the cardholder money with which to make purchases. The store supplying the goods being purchased receives the money, but the money that's used does not belong to the buyer. The credit card provides the cardholder with access to someone else's money. Question number 8. During what period money was a better store of value? 1960 to 1980 or 1990 to 2009? Well, the answer is very short. Between 1960 and 1980, there was a US as an inflation problem. So the inflation was much higher than in 1960s and 80s than between 1990s and 2009. And as we know, the store of value means that the purchasing power in the future, and we know that the inflation curbs the purchasing power. So the answer of this question is that money was a better store of value between 60 and 80. Question number 9. What is included in M2 that's not included in M1? While M1 includes the paper currency, M2 does not only include the paper currency but also include the small denomination time deposits, saving deposits, money market deposit accounts, and retail money market mutual fund shares. Next question. Why do economists claim the consumer price index tends to overstate the actual rate of inflation? Remember, the CPI, the consumer price index, is measured by using a fixed expenditure weight index. Suppose that the good A is included in the basket of goods and services in the calculation of consumer price index. Then when the price of A increases, then there is an assumption that people continue to purchase the same quantity of A. However, in reality, many consumers may stop purchasing this item and select the lower price substitute. And this substitution toward the lower price good is not reflected in calculating the consumer price index. And another problem might be is the introduction of new goods. For example, in 2007, before 2007, the use of iPads, iPhones are not relevant. So when you calculate the 2007, the consumer price index in 2007, there's a good chance that the iPhones or iPads are not included in the basket of goods and services in calculating the consumer price index. So that might lead to measurement problems in CPI. Next question, how was the Bureau of Labor Statistics change the calculation of the CPI in order to take substitution bias into account? Again, as I mentioned in the last question, the substitution bias is a weakness, is an overstatement of inflation by the CPI that comes from the fact that the calculation of the index is based on the assumption that people are not going to change the quantity of goods and services that they used, which are included in the CPI. Since prices do not all rise at the same time, people can avoid some inflation by changing their spending pattern by substituting lower price goods in place of those whose prices have risen. In order to take this into account, the Bureau of Labor Statistics now changes the weights used in the CPI in every 2 years. Therefore, today's CPI is a much more accurate measure of inflation than the one 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The next question, what was the double liquidity shock that occurred in the US financial system in the summer of 2007? Well, it first started with the fact that the investors began to doubt the value of mortgage-backed securities that were backing the deposits of investment bank depositors. Then the market liquidity for mortgage-backed securities disappeared, and the investment bank that held them faced tremendous losses. In turn, funding liquidity for these institutions dried up as the potential losses caused their lenders to be worried about the safety. And the lenders the depositors start to take out their deposits from the investment banks, and as a result of this panic, the investment banking sector collapsed. And this panic in the so-called unconventional banking sector jumped to the conventional commercial banking sector, and the credit vanished from the financial sector, from the financial system overall. And the last question, after the Revolutionary War, the US monetary system was based on gold. Historically, why did the US adopt the use of a gold as a currency? How does this compare with the currency used today? Well, historically, US adopted the use of gold as a currency because people had some suspicion concerning the use of fiat currency. During the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress issued Continentals. Well, they became worthless because of rising inflation, because of abundance of Continentals in the financial markets, in the system, let's say, and using gold to back currency gave the public the trust in the government's ability and desire to protect the value of the purchasing power, to be more specific, to prevent the inflation. Today, it's working different. The currency printed by the U.S. Treasury Bureau of Engraving and Printing is the fiat money. That means it has little or no intrinsic value. The general public is willing to use this paper currency because they trust the government's promise to protect its value. People have an expectation that they will be able to use the existing currency to pay for goods and services, and they have an expectation that the purchasing power of the paper currency in the future is not going to vanish.